Where it come from?
I got the idea when I was reading an article, and it was actually the timing, it was almost 3 years ago. And I had just turned in Two Can Keep a Secret, which was a really hard book for me to write. It was my second book. I rewrote it a lot. I was very burnt out. I was like, I'll never have another idea. This is too hard. And I was reading a magazine article about the Kennedy grandchildren, and a lot of them are doing interesting things in entertainment or politics or business. And I just thought, wow, it must be so interesting to have a name like that, the kind of name that is recognizable, that opens doors. And then I thought, I wonder what it would be like to have a name like that, but then have your legacy interrupted in some way. Like maybe your parents are a big deal, but you're not. And maybe you could have been, and then suddenly you get a chance to have it back. So that's kind of where it all came from, was just this notion of a legacy interrupted, and why would it be interrupted? And can you, as the next generation, kind of solve a mystery that your parents claim they don't understand? Do they understand? Are they being truthful? You don't know.
So that leads right into my next question that I wanted to talk with you. Okay, so you've got this grandmother that summons them, right? And she's someone who, if she says jump, they say how high. That's sort of the community,
That's
the
right.
family,
Yeah.
And I just have been really fascinated by that particular story topic of just looking at family dynamics and privilege and access. And the kids don't really necessarily have access, but they grew up with that sort of sense of, even if they had to struggle, they grew up with that sense of they know what their parents' lives might have been like.
Right.
And so I would love, why that though? What were you really hoping to leave readers with in wanting to have a story that touches on this sort of this piece of privilege and fulfillment with privilege?
Yeah, on the one hand, it's a fun, soapy story about fish out of water who go to this exclusive resort, and it's a world they don't understand, but everyone's looking at them as though they're supposed to belong, but they don't. But at another level, I did want to take a look at privilege and some of the generational trauma, if you will, that can kind of go along with a family in disarray like this one. And the second generation, the parents, are really the key, because the older generation, they sort of worked for what they created. They had connections to their community. They were altruistic. They cared about a circle outside themselves. And the second generation, the parents, really lost that. They turned inward. They were much more selfish, much more self-focused. They took for granted their status. And then when it was taken away, most of them didn't know what to do. One of the most interesting things for me was following the four siblings down these paths that are very different from what they thought that they would have, and seeing the varying degrees in which they're able to kind of accept, you got to make your own way now. You can't rely on the family name or the family money behind you. And they do this in varying degrees of success. And then what do they then pass on to their kids about that? Or do they feel entitled? Do they feel embittered? Do they have a strength of character that, has allowed them to carve out something good? Have they given up? And all of that has a different effect on the kids. So that was interesting to me in terms of having three kids with three very different experiences of how their parents react, and then seeing how they themselves also react, both to, losing that family that they never really knew, and then suddenly getting this summons that to them isn't something they're sure they want to do. The parents, it's no question you're going, but the teenagers are like, why? This person has never cared for us. Why now?
Yeah. I mean, so I want to talk about Millie, Aubrey, and Jonah. One, I always had trouble with writing multiple POVs because I'm terrible with names. And when I'm reading stuff, I really am. I'm so bad with the names. And then when, I write characters, or there's a lot of characters, I'll start to forget who they are. But you, having read all of your work, you have this incredible way of creating the most perfect name that, for me as a reader, I know exactly who they are. And so one of those names are just amazing. So I want you to talk a little bit about those rich characters that you developed, and then I have a follow-up multi-POV question for you.
Yeah, I do think a lot about names, because I think with multi-POV in particular, it's easy for readers to confuse. your characters, you know, so of course you want to make their voices as distinct as you can, but I think also you want their names to be memorable, something that will hook into someone's consciousness so that when you turn the page and someone new, you're like, oh, it's Aubrey. And that's a name that fits the character. With Millie, of course, she's named after her grandmother. So her actual name is Mildred, but that's not a name, you know, girl from 2020 would ever use. So she's Millie, which is cute and kind of sassy. And Jonah's one of those names. I have a list of names sometimes where I'll come across a name or just names I like, and I'll leave them in a sheet and think someday I will get to you. And that's what I did with Jonah. I was like, I got to have a Jonah at some point. It's a great name. But when I create characters, I always think not only about them as individuals, but as them as a collective. So I want them to all have their own like hopes and dreams and fears and reasons for getting pulled into the mystery. But I also want them to have like what I call the 3 C's, which is chemistry, connection, and conflict. And if they don't have all those 3 things, yeah, they won't work as a group dynamic. And I have stopped, you know, works in progress when I'm like, something's missing, the chemistry is not there, or you know, you can feel it. It's not right. But when it is, it really helps move the characters and the story along.
Yeah. And I don't know how you do it with having it be a mystery. Like I feel like I could tell the story with having it maybe being dual POV, but you know, it never falls flat, you know. And I think it's a very difficult skill to be able to actually tell a story with a multi-POV, with rich characters, but they all, and I love the way that you said they're like an ensemble, because they really do feel like I felt like they were a crew.
Yeah, good.
You know, like I really did. And I think just for readers, you know, so excited for so many readers to read this book, is that all the cousins have never really known each other. You know, you know, and even in some ways, like they don't even know what they look like, you know, and but that bond of when they arrived, like they became a crew. And I believe that they were, you know, as the story went on, they were family, you know, like they really were. They were closer in their weird way. They were closer than their parents were, which I found to be really fascinating. But then you added the layer of the mystery and the way that, you know, they kind of bring in those different components. How do you do this magic? Like, really, like this is not for the readers. This is for me personally as a writer of like, how do you intentionally build that, but then on top of a mystery? Do you have like a master plot board? Do you like, what are you doing? What is this? What is this like magic here?
It starts with the big idea, you know, of what the big mystery is, which I won't spoil, but it's what you find out at the end, you know, the mystery behind this family. That's what I work toward. But I feel like there has to be lots of other little sub mysteries, you know, peppered throughout to help with the pacing and to keep the reader engaged and to almost like give rewards, you know, as you're going along. You're like, okay, I figured that out. Now I just have to keep going. So once I know what the big story is, I try to think of all the sub mysteries that could feed into it and who's involved in those. And ideally, every single character has their own little mystery that they're trying to solve. You know, they're more personal stakes that go up against the bigger stake of the big question at the center of the book. But I mean, I will say it takes time, you know, like this book, I consider my easy book. I wrote it like super fast and I was really happy with it. And I sent it to my agent. I'm like, yeah, we're good. And she sent back these long notes because the middle always kills me. You know, the middle just like slowed down and the mysteries weren't gelling, and she was absolutely right. You know, so it's a lot of back and forth and trying to figure out like, okay, how do we make sure we're not losing people, you know, right at the point when we want them to be the most invested. And some of that involves going back and like reconfiguring the mystery. And the past mystery, and this one in particular, was tricky because it had to fit into the present and be something that these teenagers realistically could solve and figure out, even though it happened 24 years ago, which is not easy. So that took the most work.
Yeah, and I think
but it's a lot of outlining. I'm a plotter for sure.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm a pantser. That's the problem, probably.
I used to be a pantser. I was a pantser with One of Us is Lying. But Two Can Keep a Secret was a different kind of book, and that sort of forced me to think differently. So
yeah.
So now I plot them all.
Well, I'm starting to get better. Like my future books, I've been plotting more, but I do like to pants a little bit just to kind of get it going, get the
I
juices.
mean, there's some magic to pantsing, that I
Yeah.
think you never want to lose. It's that feeling of possibility and letting the story take you somewhere. I just think it's so common, I feel like, as writers kind of progress and they have more deadlines,
Hmm.
and need to create things and a time frame that isn't entirely their own, that you do rely more on those tools like outlining and, like having certain milestones in place that you
Hmm.
can say, okay, yes, I have achieved this. I'll move on to the next part.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing that like I thought was such a great tie-in is it just like perks you up immediately is the I don't know the exact language, but it's like you know what you did.
Yes, it's
So
my other
so
tagline.
yeah, so that's something that the grandmother shared with the parents, and then the kids know of this story of, or if that's the exact language of, you know what you did. And one, I loved it because it did sound like like I could see an elder telling me like, like
I mean,
you know,
I've been
you
told
know, I've been told
that.
that. And then it also like it felt like it pierced me personally in a way because there are moments when you have like either a loss of a friendship or some interaction with someone that things have changed, but you don't know
Right,
why. And you sort of ask
right.
this question of, did I do something? And that sort of carries this weight throughout the book until those layers start, peeling back. And then obviously all the twists that come with it, which we won't
Starts
ruin.
rushing at you.
Yeah, but like the peeling of it, and so I'd love for you to talk just a little bit about like that magic that you put around just something so simple as like, you know what you did. Um, yeah, also I won't add the other question, but yeah, I'd love for you just to like just talk about that
I,
piece.
it's funny. I do feel like short phrases like that almost capture the whole mood of a book have a lot of power,
Mhm.
So both like family first, always, and you know what you did were kind of like the two linchpins of the mystery. And I used them a lot throughout the book. And then ultimately, I didn't suggest this, but my publisher pulled them for the marketing materials, so family first became the tagline on the US version, and you know what you did became the art cover on the UK version,
Oh, I
because they
didn't know
do
that.
just, yeah, I should, oh wait, okay, hold on.
We're getting exclusive, y'all. We're
Here
getting
it
exclusive.
is. This beautiful
Oh,
cover. Can you see
yeah.
that? Isn't that pretty? And
Yeah.
it's got like the
That's
cool
gorgeous.
lettering.
Yeah.
And they did all kinds of interesting things with that phrase. And there's something to be said for, in a few words, kind of
Mhm.
encapsulating the mystery or encapsulating the mood of a book. And so I love when that happens. That is like a little bit magical to me when you hit on something and you think, yeah, that not only is exactly what I wanted to say, but I feel like, I can repeat it and readers will come along with me and think, yeah, this is kind of what this is about.
Yeah. Something that also was special with your book too is it wasn't just Millie, Aubrey, and Jonah that had POVs. Do you, do,
Yes.
I don't, I hate, I don't never know what someone wants to talk about, but we want
Yes,
some
we can talk
appearance. Oh
about
my God.
Allison.
Okay. Okay.
This
Like,
was funny
what?
because I didn't intend initially to do a fourth point of view. The fourth point of view is Millie's mother, Allison, in the past, when she was almost the same age as the cousins. I didn't intend that at first. That was one of those pantsing things, when you go along, and I wrote my first cycle of point of view, which I always do. I do 3 and then I stop and I think, how are we doing? Like what comes next? And my feeling at the end of that was something's missing. Like the cousins are great, they're gelling, this is working, but they're talking about their parents, but the reader's not going to get to meet them. And the parents are so crucial to this story that I have to bring them in somehow. And
Yeah.
I very foolishly thought initially that I would have all 4 of them, talk and cycle through, and which would have been, so messy. And I actually tried it with the oldest brother, Adam, who is really not a pleasant character to be inside his head. He's a very
Yeah.
selfish person. He doesn't think about other people. So he's not a good narrator because he's not observing anybody except in how they relate to him. So that very quickly didn't work. I was like, okay, we got to pick one. And it had to be someone who could kind of hold their own with the kids and also advance the mystery. And ultimately, Millie's mother was the best choice for that. So she becomes the spokesperson for the parent generation. And she's not the most sympathetic character at the beginning, but I hope anyway, as the story develops, the readers see a different side of her than what her daughter sees. Very different. And then as the mystery unfolds, they begin to see how she became the woman that she is and why.
Yeah. And I love that because it was seeing it as her being a young person, you know, so it still was exciting. And, you got a sense about who she was like now, but like the past. So I really, really, enjoyed that piece. Another fun fact that I just learned that I was so excited when I read your book, I immediately felt like I was in Revenge with the show.
Yes.
And then I heard that like, you're like, yeah, it's like the YA of revenge. And I'm like, yes, you nailed it.
That's what I was calling it for the longest time. I was like, it's my YA revenge. I hope you know that show.
I know that show. I absolutely loved that show. And even though there was nothing, it's not like there was anything about your book that like felt like that, but I think it had that same like that flavor of like people coming into community. There's the townies, or whatever they're called, the townie folks and the rich family, and then the person comes in with all these secrets, and
there's the outsiders, there's the murky past, we're not quite sure what happens. So and I think that's where some of the soapiness comes from. I like to tell everybody this is my soapiest book, and I just think a lot of it is that it's got a little bit of that nighttime drama element to it, and that they're not in a school, which is a first for me. You don't have the distractions of having to get them to class and them having to go to homework, and even them having to deal with their parents. Their parents are not there, so they're living somewhat independently, even though they are supervised where they're living, but it's still a very different environment than I typically write, and it's much more vacation-like. They really are on their own.
How is it? This is your fourth book that you've had published. You've had One of Us Was Lying, all over the place, 40 international bestseller, all of the wonderful things. And you have these characters that live with you for so much. What is it like jumping in to, because you have I just have my main POV from my one book. And I've got these characters in it, and they still live with me, but I was never in their head. And so you have all these people dancing in your head. And so what was that like trying to start working on a new book? And do you miss those old characters? Are you still thinking about them? Are you still kind of telling their story?
I do. It's interesting. I always thought of myself as a standalone writer. Like One of Us Is Lying, I intended it to be a standalone. Two Can Keep a Secret is a standalone. Cousins, probably a standalone. But what I find is that when I'm done, the characters do stay with me. The Bayview characters really stayed with me to the point that a sequel made sense, even though it was different characters. And you do spend so much time, you invest so much in these characters and in the universe that it almost seems wasteful, that it's like one and done, and then you're never going to see them again. So I have not yet, kind of returned to another book. But I would not rule it out. It takes a lot out of you to create all those people. I was counting the other day because I'm working on my 6th book. And so that's 6 books, and it's going to be 17 point of view characters, like 17 people with like hopes and dreams and fears and backstories and families and pets. And it's a lot of people. So maybe book 7, I'm just going to bring them all together, just pick a few, mash them.
They go on vacation in the Northeast somewhere.
Everybody's favorites. I'll do a poll, and readers can choose which character from which book gets to be part of it.
So you said earlier before that I actually could ask this, because I was like dying to when I asked you. It was like, the TV series. Oh my gosh, give us all the secrets you can that you're allowed to tell us. Give us updates. What's going on?
So for anyone who doesn't know, this is For One of Us is Lying, which was, we shot the pilot, actually. It was given a pilot order last summer. We shot the pilot last fall, with the intent of the network would take a look at the pilot and make a decision. Of course, then COVID hit, so the decision took a little longer, than anybody wanted, but obviously that was very understandable. And they did ultimately decide to move forward with an 8-episode order. So it is going to be on Peacock, the new streaming service from NBC. And I do not yet know when it's going to air. I have heard the earliest possibility would be like late 2021. That could be way too early. I think they're writing the other episodes now, and I think they're going to try to shoot them in the spring/summer. So depending on how that goes, especially with restrictions and travel, and it's just a lot of stuff is up in the air. So if it all goes perfectly, it could be a fall show, but otherwise it might be more like 2022. But yeah, things are happening. It's moving forward. There's still more roles to cast, because they only cast the pilot, the people who are in the pilot. So there's still more roles to fill out, and then episodes to write, and then they'll shoot, which is pretty exciting.
That's so exciting, like to actually, even the pilot, like having a pilot made.
Yeah, even that was such a highlight, such a career highlight to just be able to go to that set. Jennifer Morrison directed the pilot, who's an actress I admire, and she's started directing. She directed an episode of Euphoria as well. And it was really exciting to see her work and to see the young cast. They are all so sweet, they're all so excited, and they got along so well. That was like a really fun thing to see, is the chemistry between them was kind of exactly what you would hope for a show like this, because so much of it depends on them as a unit, and it really felt like they had that, that they had that chemistry.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'm so excited. I can't wait. Oh my gosh, just crossing fingers, hope everything goes smooth. And
I know, I hope so.
Oh, she's here.
I'm back. I was also going to ask, my first question was going to be about the TV show, so thank you, Kim. literally
inquiring minds want to know.
So I know that the people want to know, and you mentioned something briefly, Karen, but what are y'all's upcoming projects?
Yes, so I have already finished, at least my side of it, my 5th book. That is called You'll Be the Death of Me, and it is like Ferris Bueller's Day Off meets a murder mystery. And it's coming out, I think, fall 2021, although we don't have a date yet. And it's 3 POVs, like my usual thing. And now I'm in the thick of editing my 6th book, which I can't say as much about because that stuff is changing as we speak. But I think we're on track for that to be the year after that. So, and after that, we'll see. How about you, Kim?
I'm working on my 2nd round of edits for my next book that's coming out. It's floating different titles. It has one title, but I made up a bunch. I love titles, so
Do you love titles? I hate titles. Oh my God, I'm going to ask you for help then. With my 6th book, I'm having the hardest time.
Yeah,
I have the hardest time
how
with
I do titles is like, you're like, ooh, family first always. Like, you could create that kind of thing.
I'm good at catchphrases. I'm not good at titles.
Okay. So give me a catchphrase for my books and I'll help you with titles.
Okay. All right, we'll trade.
But it's actually a historical mystery this time, and really similar themes with This Is My America. So it focuses on still racial justice and the American suburban dream, and who was included in it and who wasn't. So it still has themes on race and other kinds of things, and that comes out 2022. And then I'm working on a proposal for my 3rd book. Oh my gosh, yeah. So crossing fingers on that, and I'm super excited about that one too. So
how are you finding the whole 2nd book process? I always talk about how hard it was for me.
Oh, it's so hard. I mean, especially like being in a pandemic and all the things that sort of like make it so hard to focus. And then I typically do write contemporary, so historical is sort of my first big one. So and there's positives with it of like, oh good, I can just kind of escape and go back in the past, and I don't have to think about like, will they have masks So
Right,
those kind of
right.
decisions. But yeah, it's really hard. But so I felt really accomplished when I got that first draft in, and I actually just got my editorial letter day before yesterday.
Ooh.
And so then I'm like, oh, it's not as bad as I thought. Okay, great.
Phew. Congratulations on getting that in during a pandemic. That
I
is,
know.
yeah.
Yeah.
Second books are hard in general,
Yeah.
but this being creative right now is especially hard. So
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, we've got a great audience question. I am a middle school ELA teacher. Can either of you speak to your experiences reading and writing when you were children/teens? When did you start to see yourself as writers?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I saw myself as a writer really early. Like I started writing stories in second grade when I was about 8 years old, and I continued all through middle school, high school, and then I stopped because I decided, nobody told me this, I just decided that I wasn't actually good at writing and I wasn't going to do it anymore. I'd never even sent anything out. So I always tell students now, when I talk to them about wanting to be a writer or, just enjoying writing, that you should really let someone else tell you no. Don't take that upon yourself, like go ahead if you love it, do it, submit it if you want to. If you don't, if you're just doing it for your own self for fun, that's great too. But don't assume that it's something that you're not good at or something that you can't do. And I think most writers, they almost have to, right? They love it so much, but there are also, I think, a lot of kids who don't see themselves that way. And maybe it's not as fun for them or as exciting for them, but if they give it a shot, they'll find pieces of it that they enjoy, even if it's not something that ultimately, they want to do for a career.
Yeah, for me, I never thought of myself as a writer. I didn't feel like anyone supported me. I didn't feel like I was encouraged. I always thought it was something I was bad at. I didn't get grammar. I wouldn't even try. It was like, I'm not even going to pay attention to it, and I'm going to try to focus on all the other things. And even I have a master's degree that required me writing a paper at the end of it. But it was like dreadful. It was like, oh my goodness, I've got to write. I'm a terrible writer. And I think for this person as a teacher, it's how can you encourage that spark with all of your students and having it be something that doesn't have to look a certain way. And I think for me, I felt like writing and telling stories had to be a certain way because there's only certain kinds of books that were represented that we were reading in our classes, and it was all the classics, and I didn't resonate with the classics, and the language seemed weird, and it was boring, and I just was like, oh, if that's what a writer is, and I'm not that. And I didn't start to write until I was 32 because my mind was filled actually with stories. I was constantly telling stories. I just never wrote them down. And then I finally got tired of, not being able to like put my story down because you could only carry so much. It's like Karen's characters. You could only carry so much in your head. And then eventually
they need to come out.
They need to come out. You need to talk about them. And so that was a really big thing for me. And I do like talking about it because especially with teachers, of like, how can you really encourage it and open the creativity?
And the nice thing is, I'm looking at that stack of books behind you, and there's so much more choice now for kids, and so many great books to choose from, different ways to tell a story, to see themselves, to get engaged. That's very different from when I was a kid as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I'm jealous. Y'all don't even know what it's been like. Y'all kids today.
Get it easy.
You have it all.
Okay, so another question is, what thrillers would you recommend to someone who wants to write a thriller?
Ooh, so many. Kim's Thriller was one of my favorites this year for sure. Anything by Kara Thomas. Kara's a favorite of mine. She wrote Little Monsters, The Cheerleader. She's got a new one coming out next year called That Weekend, which is fabulous. Tiffany D. Jackson, also one of my favorites, also puts out like a book a year, like clockwork. She is amazing. Her latest one is Grown, but her first one allegedly is, has a special place in my heart. It just has an amazing ending. E. Lockhart's We Were Liars is one of the first thrillers I ever read when I was thinking I might like to write a thriller. Yeah. And that's another one that sticks with me. It has an amazing twist. And also I feel like the characters in that are really well drawn. So I could go on forever. What do you like, Kim? What have I missed?
Oh, those are the same. I really like Megan Miranda, and she's done young adult and adult, and I just love her, and especially now her adult. And I think for our thriller writers, you want to read, I think young adult and adult, because there's such a great, there's so much you can learn from it. And so I love Ruth Ware and I'm so terrible with names. Oh, Stephanie Keane is a young adult thriller mystery. She sort of has this like interesting combination of stuff that it's kind of dark actually. So I don't know if you quite call it thriller. Who else? Oh, there's a ton.
Courtney Summers.
Courtney Summers.
Oh yes.
Mm-hmm.
Y'all read The Project yet? It's
not yet.
Oh,
not yet. I'm like, I gotta get my hands on that because I loved Sadie. That was one of my top reads. I loved all Courtney stuff. She was one of the authors who, when I was first starting out, trying to write contemporary because I had started thinking I might write fantasy, which didn't work out at all. She was one of the first authors I read that I felt like, oh, okay, yeah, this is like the kind of thing that I would like to write. She had that darker YA, but with sort of like the sly humor and the suspense. So I've read everything she's ever written. I think all of it's a really good. It's probably not all of it is like a conventional thriller. She has one book that's about zombies, but it's still thrilling.
Yeah.
Speaking of, different kinds of books, what do y'all think are the tenets or like the practices you see in a really good thriller?
Good question. For me, I really feel like this is not necessarily thriller specific, but I feel like you have to care about the characters. Because no matter how good the plot is, if you don't care about who it's happening to, it could fall flat. So people often ask me like, well, how do you surprise people? And how do you come up with your plot twists? And I think plot twists are great. And I love to surprise people. I hope I do. But I don't think the story should rest or fall on whether or not I'm able to surprise you. If that's the only thing it has going for it, then you might not enjoy that journey. So characters are key, but I also think like different types of tension are important. It doesn't all have to be a mystery tension. There can be relationship tension between people is a great way to, kind of keep the excitement simmering, keep things happening. It can be friendship tension, parent tension, romantic tension, all that is good. And I also like to end chapters with cliffhangers. That is my favorite thing to do. I really try to make it so that if someone's reading my book and they tell themselves just one more chapter, then they're going to get to the end of the chapter and they're not going to be able to to that. And they'll just have to stay up.
With the cousins. I was on my lunch break and I was like, no, I can't go back to work.
Yeah. I needed to work the next day. And I was really like, come on, Karen, really.
That's my favorite thing to hear. I have no regrets when I hear that.
Oh, yeah. And I agree with all of those. I really like rich characters. And I like them to have a purpose. I mean, that's part of the mystery, but it's drawn towards there's something that they really, really want to seek. And I love page turners because I am a fast reader. And, I just love like ripping through those pages and just being like, oh, they keep me going. And I think the thing that's really hard for mystery and thriller writers is that if you love this genre, you're actually really good at solving mysteries.
Yes.
And thrillers. So it actually makes it a really high, tall order for writers to keep ahead of your like your investigators who are like chasing the story as you're writing it. And I think that's the tricky part. So you can't really be lazy, because for me, I actually get really frustrated, when I'm picking up a mystery or a thriller, and sometimes it's important to have the plot be like, that you figure it out early, but then there has to be that balance of them. It's the characters or it's something else. But if I've already got it solved after the first couple of chapters, then I'm going to be very irritated. So that's something I think that's tricky for writing this kind of stuff. So.
Yeah. And I know when I first started, writing mysteries, everything felt really obvious to me because I knew the answer. And I would be like, oh, this is like so obvious. This person is doing X, Y, and Z. And it did take some time and some editing to kind of realize that I wasn't being as obvious as I thought, because that is kind of a fear, I think, sometimes that you're, leading people in a certain way and it's going to be really obvious. And one of my favorite things to do, this is my trick, is I like to hide clues in a scene that's really important for something else. So there's like another conversation happening. There's something important going on and you're focused on that. So you'll remember it. And then there's like a little thing happening off to the side that seems unimportant, but later you'll find that it matters a lot. So if two characters are fighting and arguing about something else and the third character is like off to the side doing like a little sly thing, you should probably pay attention to that little thing because it's going to matter later. So there are ways of slipping things in that people will remember because it's important for them to pick up on it, but not say, oh, well, there you are, you dropped a clue.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think that is our time. Thank you all so much. This has been just such a great conversation. I feel like I learned a lot of writing tips, which is always really nice.
Thank you. That was so fun. And Kim, thanks for doing this with me. It was so
Thank
fun to
you.
hear your perspective on everything.
I was so nervous. I was like, oh, Carrie's so great. What should I say?
No, you're awesome. We have to do more of these.
You can get signed copies of The Cousins at squarebooks.com. You can also buy copies of This Is My America at squarebooks.com. Both would make great holiday gifts, and you can get them in line on stores or over the phone. I hope everyone has a safe and wonderful holiday season. And
yes.
Gift wrap is free. Squarebooks would like to remind you, gift wrap is free, and that is extremely important. They do have an army of people to gift wrap your presents. They are professionals.
That's really nice.
They have really cute paper too, so it's a plus. But that's all from me. Do y'all have anything you want to say?
No, just thanks everyone for joining us, and thank you for hosting us. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, no problem. So happy to be here.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Read Cousins.
Bye.